All right, welcome everybody. Tonight is February 15th, 2023. This is the Upper Dublin School District Finance Committee, and I will call the meeting to order. We have the whole committee here. We have most of the board and at least two board members I know are participating remotely. Tonight on the agenda, we do have a wide-ranging presentation as usual from ICS and CMTA on the various projects they're working on for us. Including the transportation feasibility study. To be absolutely clear, we don't anticipate making a recommendation to the full board regarding transportation tonight. We do expect to make that recommendation next month at the Finance Committee meeting. Tonight, if there is a big topic, it will be the boilers from Fort Washington and the other elementary schools. So any introduction to make on the presentation other than that? All right, so why don't we kick it off? Megan, are you going to kick it off for us? Bill?
Mr. Sirota, just one of the things, because the presentation is a little bit long, if we can just hold questions till the end, and then we can go back to any parts of the presentation that we need to.
Sure.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to introduce everybody and go through the agenda real quick for you. Thank you again for having us. Tonight, Megan's going to give you the construction update for Fort Washington and the high school. Then we're going to roll into Michael is going to go through the facilities assessment and the GISA project. And then Tim will follow up with the transportation analysis. So, any questions you have, we'll be happy to answer them. And thank you again. Megan, you want to?
Hi, everyone. So starting at the high school, if you could go to the next slide. With the roofing work, we're working on the athletic entrance roof. We're installing the standing seam metal panels. Next, we'll do the siding and soffit work, as well as at the natatorium, we have siding work to do there too. So that will continue. We're expected to finish that up by summertime. The damaged light fixtures at the natatorium inside the pool have been replaced. So that work is completed, and we temporarily striped the tennis courts. That's the upper tennis courts, because we plan to do the coatings work this spring as soon as temperatures permit. So we have coordinated that with the athletic director, because he will have to relocate the team for about 2 weeks to get that work done. We also have the Cardinal Stadium scoreboard that's been delivered. We're just working with the electrician to get that installed when weather permits. And the natatorium scoreboard was also delivered. We plan to install that over spring break. Next, we just have some photos of the high school roof. And then moving over to Fort Washington, we did get our TCO, and teachers and students are all moved into phase 1 classrooms. We started demo this week for phase 2. We had our pre-demo meeting with the township as well. The library furniture, all of that has been delivered and installed. And the geothermal, the grouting has been completed, and the vault has been set. Right now, we're working on the manifolds and the horizontal piping. Temporary walls for phase 2 have all been installed, and the LGI ceiling has been demoed. And then the construction schedule has remained the same for phase 2 and phase 3. Next, we have some photos of just typical classrooms. There's also the hyperlink in there for the 360 tour that you can reference. And the next slide is the library. Then Michael's going to come up and talk about the fire pump at Fort Washington Elementary School.
Yep, just a couple price cost adjustments for the scope. First, there's a fire pump, so additional scope needed for a fire pump at Fort Washington Elementary School. So just a little background on this process. At the beginning of the design, a flow test was conducted by the local water authority. That pretty much just showed us what the pressure was at the system to Fort Washington Elementary School. So we took that data, used it for our design, and through the calculations, we determined that a fire pump was not necessary. The pressure was sufficient. So we went through with the design and bidding process, and then the successful fire protection contractor did an additional flow test. And with the new figures, the new data, calculations showed that a fire pump was required. And then a third test was done to evaluate that discrepancy, which included both the fire protection contractor as well as the local water authority. And it supported the second test that a fire protection or a fire pump was necessary. So next slide, please. Just some quick calculations to support that data. Essentially, at the furthest sprinkler head, we needed about 7 psi to sprinkler the entire system. With the first test, it showed that there was 11 psi, so it was plenty of pressure for the entire system. With the final test, there was a significant reduced pressure at the city level, which led to a reduced pressure in the building itself. So with that final test, it did show that a fire pump was necessary for the system pressure. So additional cost comes with that additional scope as well at about $155,000. And that not only includes the pumps and the controllers for those pumps, but also additional code requirements and heat exhaust, a fence around the fire pump, and emergency lighting in that room. Slide, please. The other project cost adjustment to consider today is the permit allowance reimbursement. So at the beginning of the project, CMTA included a permit allowance, not knowing what the exact figure would be for that Upper Dublin Township permit fee. And since that time, the school district and the township have negotiated permit fees. And so all that allowance that has been included in the project budget is being reimbursed to the school district. There are some funds that are being maintained as that allowance for special inspections and other permitting fees that go along with that. But the net change there would be about $222,000. So in summary, with the fire protection scope added and that reimbursement, it's a net change of about $67,000 that would be reduced from the total project cost for the GISA scope. And just to note that that $68,000 would be held within the Upper Dublin project budget to pay for those permit fees that the school district is now paying directly. And just as a reference point, phase 1 has been completed, about $7,000 worth of permit fees applied up to this point.
So the next steps for the high school are to continue working on the roof as weather and noise permits with the building being occupied. Also getting ready for spring sports. We'll have the scoreboard stadium installed at the Cardinal Stadium. Discus and shot put areas will all be completed, and we will coat the tennis courts as soon as weather permits. We have the natatorium scoreboard installation and the Pico switchgear scheduled for over spring break. And then at Fort Washington, we continue to construct phase 2 work and move into phase 3 as soon as possible.
Next slide, please. So moving into capital planning, the progress to date. So at the last Finance Committee meeting, we presented utility information and facility overviews. And since that point, we've evaluated that data and information and proposed project opportunities with associated cost estimates that we'd be going today. And just from a high level, from a 10-year capital planning perspective, kind of the result of the meeting last month was about $55 million worth of need, $42 million worth going towards capital projects, and then the other $13 million going towards operations and maintenance. Slide, please. So briefly, facility overviews from the last meeting for Thomas Fitzwater. The main concern right now are the boilers. They are in need of replacement at this time. The cooling in the classrooms is window AC, so no central cooling. And the classroom units are at the end of their useful life. Maple Glen Elementary School, there are maintenance and controls existing concerns. High gas consumption at the facility, higher than other district facilities. And right now it is a 2-pipe changeover system, so it's either heating or cooling. Lastly, Jarretttown Elementary School also has cooling through window AC. There are maintenance concerns due to building additions, and you can see in kind of the color on the graphic there. And those classroom units are also at the end of their useful life as well. So the recommendations for tonight, so we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail, but just a quick summary for approval in this meeting tonight. First, the Thomas Fitzwater Elementary School boilers. We're recommending a boiler replacement for this summer. Similarly, at Maple Glen Elementary School, we're recommending a boiler replacement and targeted controls upgrades for the summer of 2023 as well. For approval in the next meeting to proceed with the design would be the Thomas Fitzwater Elementary School, a targeted facility renovation, which would start in the summer of 2024, so next year. And then for future planning, Jarretttown Elementary School, just a little bit more discussion needed to be had for Jarretttown before recommending options. So starting with the boiler relocation, so Fort Washington Elementary School with the new geothermal system have existing boilers that are about 6 years old. As you know, that we have considered relocating to another facility in the district. The first option we looked at was relocating those boilers to Thomas Fitzwater Elementary School, and the second option is relocating those boilers to Maple Glen Elementary School with new boilers at Thomas Fitzwater Elementary. And tonight we are recommending option number 2. The main reason we're doing that is because of the boiler size consideration. The boilers are significantly larger than what is needed for the Fitzwater School. So the Thomas Fitzwater needs about 50% of the total boiler output, where Maple Glen is a bit of a better fit at needing closer to 70% of that output. So having the boiler sized correctly helps with maintenance concerns as well as comfort concerns and not cycling the boilers on and off too often. There are installation logistics that also went into it. It's a little bit of an easier install on the Thomas Fitzwater. So if you go to the next slide, please. This just shows the 2 mechanical rooms and the access points into each of those rooms for this. So next slide, please. So the advantages of project option number 2 here for the boiler relocation. First, with Thomas Fitzwater Elementary School, the boilers are sized, it makes sense to size the boilers appropriately in this facility, especially in the context of potential future HVAC renovation that we'll discuss in slides to come. And then for Maple Glen Elementary School, relocating the Fort Washington boilers to Maple Glen would extend the hot water system useful life and avoid capital costs. So the Fort Washington boilers, like I said, are 6 years old, so they have about 14 years left in useful life, and they would be replacing Maple Glen boilers, which are 23 years old. So those boilers do have a little bit of useful life left in some components, but the burners, which is a key component, would need replacing in the short term. And so not only would you be extending the useful life of about 14 years with the remaining life in those Fort Washington boilers, but you'd be avoiding about $100,000 worth of burner replacements at Maple Glen for those burners. Doing this scope also helps in solving existing controls concerns at Maple Glen Elementary School that could put the building at risk. The Fort Washington boilers have their own boiler manager that would be relocated as well to Maple Glen Elementary School to help control the units. And then it would also achieve energy and dollar savings sooner. New boilers at Fort Washington are much more efficient than those at Maple Glen. So achieving energy savings, then utility savings, and we're estimating about $4,000 annually in utility savings associated with that scope. So yeah, just as at a high level for the last slide, we are recommending project option number 2, boiler upgrades. So at a high level here, Maple Glen Elementary School for facility level. Facility condition considerations. First, with controls, there are 3 different systems controlling different locations of the building, as you can see on the graphic there that are shown in different colors. Classroom units, there are existing maintenance concerns, and the equipment is nearing the end of its useful life. While it is a newer facility, it is still about 23 years old, so that equipment is aged. So the recommendations that we have tonight, first, the boiler plant upgrade would be the Fort Washington boiler relocation, which was discussed on the slide, as well as controls upgrades. So these are targeted upgrades, specifically looking at the red area on that graphic, which is the oldest portion of the control system, and then retro commissioning in troubled locations, and that entails using the existing controls and site evaluations to go on a unit-by-unit basis and update anything that needs to be updated to make sure that everything is operating correctly. So the recommendation results there, in addition to the boiler advantages from the previous slide, would be again to extend the useful life of the overall system by addressing concerns in those unit by unit analysis as we go through the retro commissioning process, as well as additional energy savings that are associated with that retro commissioning. So with the boiler update as well as the retro commissioning, expecting close to $15,000 or so in annual utility savings with both of those combined. Next slide, please. So moving into Thomas Fitzwater Elementary School and the recommendations moving forward. The first recommendation is an immediate renovation. And so that's that boiler, the new boiler upgrade scope that we had discussed in previous slides, which we would recommend to do this summer of 2023. And then the next recommendation would be for a further renovation, a more comprehensive HVAC and controls renovation, along with fire protection upgrades as well. And oftentimes we find that it makes sense to do ceilings and lighting along with scopes that if you're taking down the ceiling, it makes sense to go back with a new ceiling at that time. So that's why we bundled those together kind of in one scope there. In future considerations as well, the finishes, you can do new flooring and cabinetry throughout the facility, as well as partial roof upgrades where needed and where required. And just a note on those future considerations, they don't have to go on at the same time as the HVAC renovations. They can be done on the timeline that the district decides. So as far as the project options go, before going into the numbers here, just to note that the school district is not committing to any of these dollars at this point. We're really looking for a direction here, and we would design and bid each of these project options to then come back to the district with the final hard costs for the scope. This is really for a direction to proceed with design. So that first project option includes both the boiler relocations at Thomas Fitzwater, where new boilers would go at that elementary school. Maple Glen would get the Fort Washington boilers as well as targeted controls upgrades. Project option number 2 is the same as project option number 1, except with adding in that more targeted HVAC renovation next summer at Thomas Fitzwater Elementary. So that includes, that moves closer to $9.8 million, and that includes central cooling and indoor air quality improvements and new DDC controls, which is about 80% of that cost addition. The fire protection upgrades would be about 10% of that, and then the ceilings and lighting would be the other 10%. And then the final option there that we're showing is for project option 3 is the same as project option 2, except adding in the additional finishes and flooring and cabinetry at this time. But tonight we are recommending project option number 2 for our recommendation. Slide, please. So going to the schedule briefly, so this shows that we can do the boiler relocation this summer for both the facilities, but we are requesting direction tonight at this meeting in order to proceed with the design and bidding so that we're ordering the boilers in time to do that renovation. And then moving into Thomas Fitzwater renovation, it would start the construction in summer of 2024. So we'd be looking for direction in the next Finance Committee meeting in March, again, to start with the design and bidding process in order to order equipment in time for next summer there.
Good evening, everyone. Next, we're going to go through the transportation site feasibility analysis. Since the January meeting, our team completed the analysis. Everyone should have received the report last week. Hopefully you had a chance to look through it. But basically, we completed the ordinance review, the site analysis, which we're going to go through here, the evaluation of utilities. We formed a budget for the project, and also developed a construction schedule, preliminary construction schedule for the project. And then kind of lastly, did a high-level analysis of the district office site to the 309 site, which we'll go through at a high level here. Slide. So for reference, this is the proposed floor plan. This was reviewed with Chris Robbins, Director of Transportation, just so you guys understand what this entails. It's, that green area is the maintenance, bus garage maintenance area. To the left is tool storage and parts storage. And then to the right, you'll see restrooms and some office spaces. And then we just wanted to show an aerial of the district office site for anyone who's not familiar with it. It's across from Maple Glen Elementary, and it's on the same site property as the district office. And this is the site plan that we've developed for this this feasibility analysis. You can see the gray area is the building footprint itself. It's kind of tucked, the area of the whole site is tucked in between the baseball field, which is on the left, and then the flood hazard area, which is in the upper right in blue. You can see we've kind of noted that it's over top of the two fields, the softball field and the soccer field. We did try to make use of some of the existing infrastructure that you have there. You have existing parking and existing drive access area that we used and expanded on to minimize cost and project. Now with this layout, the buses can pull through the spaces, which was preferred by the transportation facility director, just so that you'd note that as well. Next slide. And then we also coordinated with Highland Fleets on potential electric vehicle infrastructure, chargers, and dispensers. You could see that they were kind of located down that center line of the two parking areas for the buses. It did change the orientation of the parking, so instead of the pull-through, which you saw on the previous slide, this would be more of a pull-in, back-out, which also is acceptable to Chris Robbins, the Transportation Department. I believe currently they have a back in and then pull-out situation, so this would be an improvement over what you have there. We did also coordinate with PICO. We're still waiting, just so everyone's aware, we're waiting the termination if they have, if they can meet the requirements for electrical service there. But we did at least engage them and have started that process for the district, actually at both sites, regardless of which one you pick. Next slide. So for the kind of the next few slides here, we'll be kind of comparing just at a high level the district office site to the 309 site. So for reference, this is the previous analysis that was done at the 309 site. It's between the Fort Washington Elementary and the Field of Dreams. And just keep in mind that when this was done, it still had the fuel pump included and didn't include provisions for electric charging. So that would all need to be adjusted if this site were selected. Next slide. So for the building and the site work required for the district office site, we developed this budget. We're not going to go through all the numbers here, but the budget basically rolls up to about 10.2 million. With that, we've also noted for district benefit some items where we think the cost would either be a little bit higher or lower with the admin site versus the 309 site. So for instance, the baseball field netting, which would be required kind of on the left side of the site, wouldn't be needed at the 309 site. So that would save a few $100,000 in the budget. But meanwhile, there are additional items that might be needed at the 309 site, additional asphalt and sidewalks. So overall, the $10.2 million budget for the district office site, we feel it would be less for the 309 site, but still probably more than what was previously presented in the feasibility analysis that was originally done for the 309, just because market conditions have changed in the last couple of years. The construction schedule that we developed basically outlines about a 30-month or 2.5-year process from start to finish. You could see the breakdown about 9 to 12 months for land development and design, 3 months for bidding and award of contracts, and then roughly a little bit over a year for construction and closeout. And then this slide really just provides that high-level comparison of the two sites. As far as general site requirements around minimum lot size, setbacks, and maximum building coverage, impervious surface, both sites meet those requirements. For accessory building requirements, both sites will require some variances, which we've discussed at the last meeting. But the 309 site, since it's over 25 acres and already has a school on the property, you wouldn't need to get a variance for a bus repair garage, which you would need for the district office site. Additional office site or off-site improvements, basically any roadway expansions, additional traffic signals, that all would be to be determined with the traffic study. We haven't done that at either site at this point, but when you select a site, you would need to do that as part of that first step design process. Existing utilities, electric, natural gas, water, sewer, are generally available at both sites, so pretty equal in that respect. And then impact to surrounding area, we noted that the 309 site, after discussions with the township, had less noise concerns than the district admin site, just based on the highway being right next to it. It's elevated, helps kind of contain some of the noise. And also the loss of sports fields associated with the district office site. And from a budget impact, the 309 site should be a little bit less expensive than the district office site. So really, next steps here would be to select which site to proceed with, and then start the design and land development process. Come back with final bids to be decided on to start construction. And for this slide, I'm going to pass it to Andy around funding.
Yep, I'll cover the last two slides. So just to go along with everything you just heard now, all the work that this committee and the board has to consider, I just wanted to give a summary of the financials as we think about what is our funding strategy to start to pay for all of this work. And as we look over the current year and the next 3 years, I'm estimating that we have all but $1.9 million of the recommended projects funded with funds that are currently available, excluding the transportation facility that we just talked about here. So when you look at this slide here, everything in red is an estimate and everything in black is actual. When you look at the top of this slide, that's all of our funding sources, so the funding that's available. We have approximately $27 million in funds available for capital projects. I want to be clear that that's not a direct correlation back to our capital reserve fund if you're comparing that number to the treasurer's report, because that excludes the $5.5 million of bond proceeds that are currently being used to fund the Fort Washington Giza project. And it also does not include the ESSER 3 funds that we've set aside for the air quality improvements. And, that's more targeted towards the potential work that we're discussing at Thomas Fitzwater Elementary School. Additionally, the $585,000 we have in the budget to transfer to the capital reserve in our current year budget has not occurred yet. So additional available funding sources beyond that you see in the kind of blue shaded cells up there. We know that our current year budget is trending positively, especially when we start to look at revenue and interest rates being higher. We're generating significantly more interest this year as an example. So I believe that we're trending positively this year, and our current budget will have surplus at the end of the year that we can consider again transferring to capital reserve to help pay for a significant amount of this work. And we also know that the Sandy Run project that budget is trending positively. So it's likely that we'll end up with funding remaining from our bond proceeds for the Sandy Run project. Those funds can only be used for eligible capital expenditures, and they must be spent within 3 years of when the bonds were issued. So those are additional funds that we could look to utilize for some of this work.
On the expenditure side, you can see here that Fort Washington project, the $12.1 million there, we're currently working through that. We have placeholders here for the Maple Glen Gymnasium roof replacement, so we're hoping to bring bids back to this committee in March to review. The high school natatorium rooftop units, the evaluation is almost completed, so we hope to have better information by the end of this week on the cost of that, but we've got a $900,000 placeholder there. And then the recommendations that you just heard about, again, I think Michael did a nice job of presenting that. As recommended, our administration supports the recommendations that are made as well. So that's all built into this. And then the other significant items are factored in as well, and those are on the next slide so you understand what those are. Other items which will require further planning and discussion include the transportation facility. So again, that's obviously, there's no number built in here because from my standpoint, my recommendation would be if we move forward with that project, as we recommend, we would look to issue debt, a bank qualified debt issue for that. So we can issue up to $10 million like we did in the past for Sandy Run. So I recommend that that would be considered for the funding. And the main reason there is that we are currently paying approximately $500,000 a year to lease the facility on New Jersey Drive. So any increase in debt service would be offset by that reduction in cost for leasing that facility. So that's a way we could pay for that project and not have impact to the budget. And then Jarretttown is also on here as a placeholder. So obviously, Michael mentioned we have more work to do there, but there's not currently a plan for Jarretttown. We don't really know what that project looks like yet, and as we discuss that more, we'll work on that. The last slide here is the other significant items. You can see Mr. Lesser and I have been working on what other work needs to be done, and you can see the other projects that we need to consider here. Obviously, the gym roof replacement is on there. That's a duplicate. But the other line items you can see on there, the big one is the Maple Glen Elementary roof replacement. So again, we're talking about the gym roof right now. That's our immediate need. We know that the entire roof at Maple Glen is 23 years old and aging. So there is going to be a need to replace that roof in the near term as well. So I think that covers what we want to present tonight. I will use this time now to answer questions. I'm sure there's lots of them. We covered a lot of information there, and certainly our professionals will help answer those questions with us. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Sirota.
Well, thank you to all of you for a wide-ranging report. Before we get into the exciting future-looking projects, I don't want to lose sight of some big news that was in there. The Fort Washington Phase 1 project complete. We have students in the renovated section. The library is open. Any comments on, how the move-in went and how it's all working?
Our movers and custodial staff, maintenance staff, and teachers did a great job moving. It was pretty seamless. The classrooms opened for students officially on Monday. Kids were getting used to their new classrooms and new layouts. Overall, the kids give the rooms a 2 thumbs up in an informal poll.
All right, let's turn it over to the members of the committee for any comments or questions on anything else in that wide-ranging report. Jenna.
Well, Mr. Sirota, do you want to take these kind of in chunks? Do we want to start by talking about the boiler?
In the end, we are going to need to have a recommendation for direction on the boiler at this meeting. So I want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. If we want to dive into them topic by topic, that's fine. I think we can go organically as long as we don't lose track of that item, and I'm sure we won't.
Okay, so, let's, why don't we start with the boiler then? Might as well, right? Okay, so just to recap, to make sure that I'm following this and it's clear to members of the community. So the recommendation is to take the existing boiler from FWES, move it over to Maple Glen, solves a couple problems. And then, of course, we would need to purchase then a new boiler for FITS, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and again, in terms of, let me just focus on the maybe financial benefits for a second of, I think what we're calling option 2, which we're moving it to Maple Glen, right?
Correct.
So moving it to Maple Glen, you mentioned we save about $100,000 on new burners that we would need at Maple Glen if we don't move this particular boiler, right?
Correct.
Okay. Were there any other, I mean, there's other financial benefits, I guess, to Maple Glen. You mentioned lower energy costs, et cetera. Any other kind of hard financial benefits to moving it to Maple Glen?
The only other hard financial benefit is more of a long-term to replace the whole boilers at Maple Glen. So we would be avoiding that cost, but that is further down the road. But again, a big part of those boilers are the burners, which would be avoided.
And at some point, I mean, Fitz is the more urgent boiler situation, right?
Correct.
So in theory, just playing it out, we could, I just want to kind of talk through both options. So we could move it to Fitz. It's a little bigger than we need at Fitz, right? So, you know, you're kind of overdoing it a little bit. And we could wait then to purchase a new system for Maple Glen because it's still got some years. But when you're talking about purchasing, it would be cheaper to purchase a new unit for Fitz because it needs less output, right?
Correct. Yes.
Do you have any sense of what that differential would be, purchasing a new unit for Maple Glen versus Fitz?
So the Maple Glen boilers would need to be about 4,000 MBH compared to 2,500 MBH. So I think we did get estimated budgets for these, and I think the difference was about $50,000 or so, maybe closer to 100, but I would have to look at those numbers, and I can give you the exact.
Okay. Okay.
Anyone else? Comments? Alima?
Regarding the boiler coming from Fort, what's the current lifespan on that boiler?
Which boiler?
The one that's going to be relocated to Thomas Fitz.
So the lifespan is typically about 20 years for those boilers, and it's about 6 years old right now, so that's about 14 years left.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Art?
I have a number of questions. Page 10, where we talk about the permit allowance fees, I was confused in terms of what, it's going back to the district, but I don't see an total estimate that the district will have to pay.
So we don't have an estimate for this, just like we don't for the Sandy Run project. So we're currently paying actual permit and inspection fees as they're coming up. So instead of the typical $25 for every $1,000, which is the township base calculation. So we don't know what the actual cost will be. It'll just be as we incur them, we'll pay them. We believe the $67,000 that we're holding will be sufficient to cover the cost there.
Right, in the budget, we originally put in the 229, 466.61. Okay.
Correct. That was just a number of special inspections they have, which were
Right.
small costs, but the rest was just that straight calculation that the township charges for projects.
Right, and you said 67,000, what you're in, that's a placeholder right now? Okay, is that in here? I didn't, is that number?
So it's on slide 10, right? So the difference between, that's
Yeah, the
the
67.
net effect of the change order. It'll reduce the total project by $67,000. We'll hold that in the project budget for permit and inspection costs.
Right, and you don't think it will exceed 67,000?
We don't know how many times the township will come out to do permits and inspections. We call them, but we have no way to estimate that.
Okay, I
We
mean,
believe that should be sufficient to cover.
Okay, I was asking because we put in almost $230,000, but now we realize that number was extremely high. It will be lower.
No, that number was not extremely high. So if the township would charge us based on their calculation for permit and inspection fees, it's a straight $25 for every $1,000 of the cost of the project. Typically, the township would just charge us that. As part of this project, we've negotiated with them, and we're just paying them for the actual costs of what it's costing them to come out and do for permits and to do inspections. So it was not overestimated. We estimated what the actual cost would be if
Cost
the
was.
township would
And
charge us their
is that-
base fee.
Is that a similar model that is occurring at Sandy Run?
It is. I think just because it happened at Sandy Run wasn't a foregone conclusion that it would happen for future projects, which is why Mr. Leckman and our professional team put in that larger figure. Now, through our conversations and collaboration with the township, they have agreed to do what we did at Sandy Run, and so now we can more appropriately set aside those funds.
Okay, good.
And again, I'll be clear, just on this project. That's
Right.
not for any project we do in the future.
Okay. When you say this project, there's a lot of projects.
The Fort Washington Elementary School
Just
project.
the Fort Washington, okay.
Correct.
Okay, and so Transportation Center would be another negotiation?
Right. I think, I don't know that the township is ever going to give us a blanket, blanket approval to just pay as we go. That'll be a conversation with each project.
Okay. Another question, if we go to the four-pipe system at Maple Glen, the boiler that we would move from Fort Washington, if we agreed to do that, would still be able to accommodate and 70, is it around the same 70% that you'd need from that boiler, or does it push the boiler more?
It would be the same. The heating load would remain unchanged. It would just be adding in the ability to heat and cool at the same time. So the boilers would be sufficient.
Okay. Project 2, I guess that was on page 20. You're recommending that we do that option 2?
Project option 2.
Yes, option 2. Would that also be able to be done over one summer?
It would not be done over one summer.
So it's one summer and then the following summer?
So the boiler relocation would be this summer.
Right.
And then the Thomas Fitzwater scope would start in the summer of 2024. And we may look at extending that to the summer of 2025 as well, depending on how much scope is
I
included.
missed that. It would start, you said December?
The summer, sorry.
the summer.
Summer of 2024.
Okay, so there wouldn't, the students would still be in the building, and we'd work around that need.
Correct. The work would be done in the summer.
Okay. I noticed in the original floor plan that Dewey did for us, I just think that space seems kind of large. I don't know. There's a significant meeting room in there. So we're not at the point yet that we're looking at what that building will look like.
I think at a previous meeting, we talked about, while we've not decided on a design, we have a general idea. I don't think we would bring back exactly what Dewey recommended to us, but the elements of what's in that design were based upon the collaboration with Chris Robbins and Mr. Leckman.
Okay, so that's still being discussed. The floor transportation over at the administration building, am I correct? It looks like there's a new exit that you are proposing out of the site?
Yeah, so the entrance is reused from the parking, where the parking is, and then on the other side is the exit. That'd be brand new. Yep.
The other side meaning further?
On the left of.
Away from the administration building, there's
Yes.
another
Yep, yep.
exit. Okay, okay, I think that's it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Alima, you got more? Go ahead. Go ahead, Titia.
Geothermal, we're moving boilers from Fort Washington because we don't know, we use geothermal there. Is there any thought put into geothermal at the two other site? Well, really the three other sites, but definitely those two that we're currently looking at. So Maple Glen and Fitz.
So there was consideration there. We can start with Thomas Fitzwater. Right now, there are heating concerns with the boilers, so we decided to look into the boiler relocation scope first, just to get through the heating season of next year, because the geothermal does take a lot more time to implement. So that's why we recommended the hot water system renovation first, moving forward there. And then in Maple Glen, the site locations where the geothermal well field would go doesn't make this, it's not a very ideal location, either on the other side of the building from the mechanical room or across the road. So actually the placement of that well field just doesn't have a great, wouldn't lend itself to a great renovation. And Maple Glen also just got a new air-cooled chiller that can be reused if you would move into a four-pipe system.
And then the boiler at Jarretttown, what's the, I think we've talked about that before, right? That was-
Despite Jarretttown being the oldest building, the systems are the simplest there, and we believe there's a fair amount of life there. The reason we're talking about Thomas Fitz is if we would head into next winter in the condition that we're in now, we could potentially have a building offline if the one functional boiler fails.
No, that makes sense. And then the transportation feasibility part, thank you for putting that together, because I think it's very helpful for us to see more than one option and really compare them. I really do like the fact that you're planning there for charging stations. The question I had, if we're looking at the 309 location, the space availability for charging stations was not in that original consideration. How does that fit into your overview at this point?
So to be clear, we didn't do the work at the 309 site, but we are aware that the same company that we engaged, Highland Fleets, also started doing some EV layouts at the 309 site as well. That was still with the fuel pump involved. So that whole site would need to get reworked. But I think that it could be accommodated just similarly. It would just be a different layout at the 309 site.
But you don't see any space limitations or flow limitations in terms of how the traffic would go? I mean, it's a larger site, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be any limitations that would prohibit putting in EV chargers.
All right, Alima.
Just two more questions for me. One is around the weather. I know a few meetings back, we talked about if there was harsh weather this winter, it may delay the project. With the weather that we've been having, has the timeline moved up because of the ability to work? I'm curious around that. At the high school with the roof.
Oh, okay. So, so some of the concerns with the roof at the high school revolve around air temperature and being able to coat. So we have been able to complete some of the edge metal and some of the curved metal roofs while we cannot do the flat roof coating. So we have been able to move forward, but I think we're still on the same schedule because we didn't anticipate doing the flat roof coatings, and we were working on the curved roof, metal roof, and edge metal as part of that. So we have not missed very many days at all, so we feel pretty confident about getting the roof done on schedule.
Awesome. My next question is around the fire pump. So on April 7th, we were cleared, but then you have underlined here with new figures. Can you kind of explain from April 7th to August 3rd, what were the new figures, and was that not accounted for in the first assessment that was done?
Sure. So that flow test that was provided April 7th, like I said, that measures the city water pressure that's available at the school. And so those were the initial figures that it showed that the city water pressure was sufficient to pressurize the entire system to sprinkler the whole facility. In August, when the fire protection contractor did that test, they saw that the city water pressure was significantly lower. So those are the new figures, is the city water pressure going into the building. And it showed that with that data, the calculation showed that the system losses or the pressure loss in the building was greater than what was needed to sprinkler the entire system. So there's a loss in pressure and not enough pressure to sprinkler the whole facility. So those are those figures. Does that answer your question?
So if I understand, it wasn't really the design, it had to do with the city water pressure? So what was coming into the school, so that changed?
Correct. There's a reduced pressure going into the school.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have? Jeff?
Just so I'm clear, on the boilers, if they go to Maple Glen, I mean, part of the advantage of that is being able to do the retro commissioning and that related work to improve the controls. Can that all be done in this summer, like in this cooling season, or would that retro commissioning have to happen later in time?
That's a little bit more flexible than the boiler relocation. Obviously, we want to do the boiler relocation in cooling season when we're not having to heat the facility. Yes, parts of the retro commissioning can be done this summer, and then the extent necessary can be completed after hours or even into next summer if needed.
And I guess this might be a stupid question, but the boilers that are at Fort Washington, I mean, the reuse, that's the best option for them, meaning like there's no valuable resale option. I assume they'd be like scrap metal if we didn't reuse them, and therefore reusing them is the most prudent thing to do. Is that a fair assessment?
Correct. The resale value is not great for these boilers, so the best option would be to relocate them.
And even though they're 6 years old, we still get enough value out of them that they're worth reusing.
Correct. There'd be an estimated 14 years remaining on this, with the average life of these types of boilers.
Great. Thanks so much.
Andy?
Do we have an understanding as to why the water pressure changed from one day to another?
No, not necessarily. The flow tests were conducted as typical just at the hydrants on site. So we don't have a great explanation for that reduction. That's why we did the third test, was to evaluate that discrepancy.
All right, I have a couple. Just the fire pump, it's going into the mechanical room?
It's going into the room across from the mechanical room.
Okay.
There's a storage room with a garage door there, and it would be tucked in the corner.
Okay, so that's why it needs to be caged off.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And I don't want to lose just a couple points of clarity. The project option 2 that we're talking about is really everything above the ceiling, right? So we're going to have a whole new above the ceiling renovation effectively of that building. But we're talking about doing all the below the ceiling stuff, floors, cabinetry, et cetera, finishes later, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so a lot of different topics there. I want to make sure is everyone comfortable moving ahead with the recommendation that we have from our professionals in our administration with option 2, which is the above the ceiling renovation of Fort Washington, of Thomas Fitzwater, with new boilers at Thomas Fitzwater and relocating the Fort Washington boilers to Maple Glen? Yep. Okay.
Can I add?
Yes, go ahead.
So just to add on to that, I think just to be clear, what we're asking for tonight, and we can certainly go with design of the whole option 2, but what we're looking for specific approval tonight is just the boiler design work at both of those buildings. And that would not be, that would be design only. There would be no cost that we would approving as part of that. It would just be to tell CMTA to go design this thing and bring it back to us next month? Or when would you bring that back to us, Michael?
We're targeting going out to bid in early March, so it would probably be either late March or early April to give the contractors time to bid on the job.
Okay, so the approval of the project itself would not take place until April. And then I certainly am open to, if we want to move forward with design of the entire FITS, but we were looking at authorization to move forward with design at March to give some time to consider that further. But I'm open to the committee's recommendation.
So that's design of the boiler relocation to Maple Glen, new boilers at Fitz, new controls and commissioning at Maple Glen. Is that it? Okay. Okay, so let's start with that. So we're all good, at least,
Just for Maple Glen.
and new boilers at Fitz. Right? We're all,
Just to be clear, the phase that you need the decision tonight is, do we move the boilers to Fitz or to Maple Glen? Basically, right? I mean, and the consequence of moving them to Maple Glen is then we're also talking about purchasing a new boiler for Fitz. Is that right? That's,
yeah, it's not just moving, though, it's also the controls and commissioning as well at Maple Glen.
yep.
Yes?
Yeah, but the rest of the work in Project 2, that we call it at Fitz, is something we're going to hear more about at the next meeting, correct?
I don't think necessarily we'd hear more about it. I think it would just give a month for it to be fully vetted and considered. So we don't need approval tonight to move forward with that design work. We would bring that forward as a recommendation for the March meeting.
Okay, are we all clear on what we're recommending then to the,
I don't know what would be the disadvantage to move forward tonight with the entire option 2?
I don't think there would be a
It
disadvantage.
gives them additional time to market.
Yeah, I don't think there is a disadvantage. I think tonight, the most pressing thing was what Mr. Leckman asked for. But if it's the will of the committee and the will of the board that you want to move all forward with option 2, we can certainly do that.
I would personally like to chunk it into smaller bites if possible and not approve everything in option 2, but just go forward with the main things and then move to the next step. That would be my preference.
One point that I think we want to make clear, not just for the committee, but for the people in the audience and the people that are at home, when we approve Project 2, you're still going to get pricing before we would move forward with any work. So this isn't a blanket approval to, completely move forward. This is just to advance it to the next step.
yes, tell them to start planning in detail? Yeah. So my sense is that if we're talking about new boilers, new HVAC system really at Thomas Fitz, we're really talking about all that work in the ceiling. And if we're going to be doing, basically central air, it's what we're talking about. And if we're, in addition to boilers. And if we're talking about doing that, we know we're going to take down the ceiling. I think we know we're going to do at least lighting, fire suppression, and whatever else comes up as the result of doing ceiling work. And I see no reason to delay that. I mean, we're not going to do those projects separately. You don't want to take down the ceiling twice. And we know that needs to be done during a summer because it's disruptive. So the sooner we can have them get started on planning it, the more likely we are to avoid unforeseen delays that could jeopardize the schedule. So I see no reason to delay that portion of the project. I have no problem with delaying the rest of the renovation at Thomas Fitz. But if we're going to do ceiling work, let's do the ceiling work. Andy.
So Andy, I just have one question about dollars. So you said earlier that taking the transportation project out of this, we can fund all this work with what we've got in our capital funds, with the exception of 1.9 million. Is that what you said?
That's what I said, yes.
Okay.
And looking forward, that's existing capital funds. We almost always, I don't want to promise, we almost always have budget surplus that we can transfer to capital. We have started the habit of transferring to capital, building into our budget a transfer to capital every year. So we're not strictly limited to funds we've already built up.
But this is part of our, I think it was our last finance meeting, it was like, all of a sudden it was $50 million that we have in capital expenditures coming down the pike. This X amount of dollars that we have everything but 1.9 of, that's part of that 50 million, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Although, at the beginning of the presentation, don't forget, there's a breakdown of that it was 55 million. There's a breakdown of that into 42 and 13, which is really capital and operational in terms of financing.
And this total, Andy, is around 23 million? Like, I'm looking. Just look at project one. No,
I think it's
how much?
about
total?
16 million roughly.
16
right?
million? Okay.
So my question is to ICS, if we look at project two, is there an advantage or disadvantage to saying, looking at the boilers and then looking at HVAC, considering that we would do it all in the same project? Just to understand Mark's point a little bit more in detail. And what about the scope of work on your end? Does that change at all? I'm just curious.
So again, you're only approving us to move forward with design right now. So we could break it into smaller parts, but we could also do it all together. And, I think the reason why Michael has been talking about 24 and 25 summers is because of the long lead time of the equipment. But the boilers are the urgent issue right now. But again, you're only approving us to move forward with design. And then we would go finish the design, go out to bid, get numbers, come back in front of you with the numbers, and then you would approve the project. But the urgency right now is boilers and heat for the wintertime, for the winter of '23.
And Bill, the pricing that you would bring back would be chunked into all of those individual pieces, so we would understand the costs of each of those components of the project potentially, and the board would not be committed to approve all of those at that point. They would see the cost, and then they could choose of that which piece of the project they would want to do, or all of it.
Yeah, that's correct. Similar to what we did with the GISA project at Fort Washington would be the same way at Thomas Fitzwater. You would be given options to select, and then whatever options you decide to select would create the project.
So I'm just throwing this out there. Would it also make sense just to include the finishes and cabinetry in that conversation and see what the price is today versus the idea of waiting out?
So we did provide you with some budgetary numbers on that. That's something we can certainly look at a little deeper. If you wanted us to provide options for like an option 3 project, we could do that.
Anyone else have opinions about option 3? Jenna?
I'm just personally, I'm not ready to go to option 3 yet. And I think the key is there's no, I think, right, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no advantage to scoping out 3 with the others. There is some advantage to scoping out 2 with 1, if that makes sense, right?
So correct. So the
Yeah.
reason why we broke this out this way is in discussions with the administration. We felt it best that, everything could be done above the ceiling.
Right.
And then if you decided to come back later and do the finishes, it wouldn't impact the work that was already done in a number 2 or a type 2 project. So you could do them separately without impacting what was previously done.
Yeah, for me, just from a prioritization standpoint, I think there's some other things that leap ahead of project 3. So again, it doesn't necessarily hurt, but I'm not in a super rush to do project 3.
But we could, as you requested, we could provide some pricing with 3 when we come back for the checklist for 2 to create the project.
I hear what ICS is saying. I don't think it hurts for them to bring back pricing, and then that way we can, at that point, have a discussion about it if it makes sense or not. I think if the reason we did the work the way we did at Fort Washington, particularly the parity work, is because we had that damaged section of the building. And what we didn't want to happen was that we would have one really nice renovated hallway and the rest of the building would look like it looks currently, right? And so, again, I don't think it hurts to see the pricing for 3, but as we prioritize the work that needs to be done to bring our facilities to the standard that we want them to be, I think definitely 2, and then we can go from there.
Okay. So we'll get to the actual recommendations in the recommendation section. Any other, I mean, I think we know where we're headed at this point, but any other comments or questions on the presentation? Okay, so to clarify for everyone and those at home, there was a lot of stuff covered in that presentation, including the transportation, the review of the feasibility study of a transportation facility at the district office site, and some comparisons to the 309 site. We're not making a recommendation on that tonight for the full board to consider, but we do expect to make a recommendation for the full board to consider on which location at next month's Finance Committee meeting. We'll certainly take input at community input tonight for those who want to speak on that topic, but no, we're not making any formal recommendations on that. Okay, thank you all very much for the presentation and the conversation. Let's move on to our regular meeting agenda. Any announcements for tonight?
Do not have any announcements.
All right, we do have minutes from our January 19th meeting, which the committee has not had an opportunity to review. Any comments or questions on those minutes? Are we prepared to accept those and move them forward? All right, so those minutes are approved and will appear on the legislative agenda as an informational item. And we'll move right into reports and recommendations, starting with the Giza project design. So as I think we heard, I think the recommendation following that discussion is to move ahead with design for option 2 as detailed. Any final comments on that? Are we prepared to move that forward? Yep, all right. So marching orders are clear? Okay. And then we have the contract change order for the Giza project that was discussed as part of the presentation, decreasing the total contract amount by approximately $67,000. Any other comments or questions on that item? Okay, so we'll move that change order ahead. Yes, okay, thank you. And then we have change orders for the insurance claim portion, which were not discussed as part of the presentation. So do we have anything to say about them?
I mean, the only thing I'll say, this is our typical that better? Yes, that's better. Okay. So this is our typical approval every month. So each month we have change orders with our contracts related to our insurance claim. Again, I think the second 2 are pretty straightforward. The first one is related to ICS. And ICS original contract was based on, the scope at the original project for the insurance claim. As you know, over time, that project has gotten bigger and bigger. So this just reflects ICS's fees as part of our contract with them for the increased cost of the insurance project. Again, the key thing here is this has all been reviewed with Utica, our insurance provider. They are aware of this. They've approved and authorized this. So they will be, that's all being paid out of insurance proceeds.
All right, comments or questions on these? All right, so we'll move these change orders ahead. All right, thank you. Sandy Run update. Bob.
Yes, at Sandy Run, the work that continues has been mostly site work. The moderate temperatures that we've been having, relatively dry recently, has been allowing more work to be completed than we expected for this time of year. So the work that's been completed with the past month is the drainage system underneath the artificial turf field has been completed, as well as the other drainage basins around the site. So there's no more temporary basins that we need to maintain. We're fully on the permanent systems. On the artificial turf field, the stone base has been put down. They're working on the final grading, so they'll actually be prepared for when the turf does arrive, that they can start laying the artificial turf down there. Fencing along the retaining wall has been completed. So last month the retaining wall is completed. Now we have fencing on top of the retaining wall around the site. We also have the sign has been installed. If anybody's going past the sign at Twining and Limekiln, that is up and running. There needs to be some tweaks. It looks great, but looking great also doesn't comply with all the ordinances. So we're working on reducing some of the animation and times that it's running. So we are working on that. This past week with the mild weather, the contractor's been taking advantage of the site work for plantings. Many more trees have arrived. Plantings are going to start to take place outside the main entrance in the flower beds, especially up against the windows in front of the building. And more sod has been arriving on site as well. If you looked in it was more the courtyard area going towards the softball field on that slope. That sod is being placed down now. It's great. It's still dormant, but the ground is good enough that it's going to take that, and we fully expect that to come back in the spring. That is it for the site work and what's been going on. We've also been working with the engineers. This has been nice this winter. Consolidated Engineering has been working with just evaluating how the building's been running. We're digging into just different tweaks to the building, make sure their temperatures are good, running efficiently. And we've had some good conversations with them, so it's been a good process.
All right, and on the budget.
Bob, are you also going to cover the driveway?
Oh, yes. Yes, thank you for that. I've been doing a lot of being that we're doing site work, we're doing a lot of walks with Dewey, with Zach from Dewey, walking outside, taking a look at things. And one of the observations is the existing roadway that we have coming in from Twining Road, that entrance to the building. Back in 2016, we did some paving work over top of the bridge when we did all the bridge reinforcement work. We noticed in the docs, after questioning about the condition of the existing pavement, that the existing portion of that entranceway from Twining Road to the school side of the bridge did not fall within the limits of the contract. It's actually outside of the scope of where the land was being disturbed. So that portion of paving is not covered. It does need to be addressed. There is some potholes that have been existing, condition of the paving. So we're evaluating that. We've asked Dewey to look into, give us some options to include that into the paving to roll with that. It really, if we're paving the whole lot and the driveway coming out, we really don't want to be stopping short of continuing out to the street. So we will be coming back with options.
And the only thing I'll mention on budget, again, there's really no major updates other than I've been pushing Dewey really hard to start to close some of these line items out. Again, we talked about kind of closing as we move towards the end of the project in August. It's important for us to start to close some of these items out. I expect some updates next month from Dewey that we can review and start to really kind of hone in on a final number for this project.
We're expecting final budget closeout to be in August, though. That's still the schedule.
Final budget and close it in August. What I'm referring to is individual line items. Like we know Butler Balancing is done with their work, so we want to start to get some final invoices and start to get final numbers on individual line items. Yes, the final budget will not be closed out until after the project is over.
All right, comments or questions on Sandy Run update? Okay. Thank you for those updates. We have disposal of excess, obsolete, and non-repairable equipment, including a lot of old textbooks, including some going back to the 90s. Any comments or questions on those? All right, so we'll move that ahead. Okay. Monthly financial reports.
Yeah, so there's, again, nothing out of the ordinary this month, so there's not too much to cover. As usual, I will be happy to answer any specific questions that anyone has, but again, total receipts very much in line with prior year. We've received 87% of our budgeted revenues compared to 86% last year. Total expenditures in line, but slightly lower this year at 49% as compared to 51. Again, this is one of our times of year where we get into January last year was a 3-pay month. This year, that 3-pay month will be in March, so that's why it's still in line, but slightly lower this month. Nothing else of significant importance to note in our other financial reports. I think we've been talking on a regular basis kind of how things are trending. Revenues, especially interest, trending significantly higher due to the rapid rise in interest rates this year. Starting next month at the March meeting, I will begin to bring projections through to the end of the year, and we'll start to talk about revenues and expenses in a little more detail, along with starting our monthly budget presentations next month with a focus on revenue as we move towards a final budget in June.
Comments or questions? Art?
Now that the audit is done on page 1 of the other reports, will you be updating the budget 21-22 to actual? And will you eliminate the budget column?
Yeah, so I typically do that as part of once we start the budget conversation, so I'll roll that all forward, but yes, that will all be updated over the next month.
Okay. Can you keep the budget column at least for a month or two so I can see the big picture?
The report has quite a bit on it, so
I know, there's a lot of columns.
I could provide something separate that has the analysis of budget to actual.
I just want to say kudos on the 1,400% increase on interest on investments. Really nice work. I know.
You want to take credit for inflation? Yeah, okay.
My next question is around other instructional programs, the 15,000. Can you just help me understand what that was or is?
Jen, do you know what's in that line item?
It was part of the ESSER funds that we received. It was a summer enrichment program. So basically, it was for salaries and benefits.
Anyone else? I will note we did have another large development come online in terms of assessment at Madison Senior Center, or another chunk of that assessment come online, so that's certainly helpful. That one's not done yet, though, right? We still expect more quarterly?
Correct, that is not done yet. And again, that'll be a slide unto itself when we go through revenue next month. I'll show you kind of what's expected versus where we're at with our new developments.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on monthly financials? All right, so we'll move those ahead. Okay. Anything interesting in budgetary transfers this month? All right, we'll move those ahead. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Andy, for the budgetary transfers, I don't have any concerns about them, but one thing that I think would be helpful is, and you did this with the second to last one, where it says, for software expenditures, if there's kind of just a shorthand that we can get for, just very basic reason for the transfer, I think that would just generally be helpful. So, just a request.
Okay. Proposal from Valbridge Property Advisors for professional services.
Yeah, so over the last 2 years, we've engaged with Valbridge Property Advisors to complete a district-wide analysis of all properties to determine if any are underassessed. We are starting this process a little earlier than we have in the past to allow for additional time to complete the appraisal process in preparation for the hearings that occur after any necessary appeals are filed. While all properties are evaluated based on a methodology that ValBridge uses, only properties that are underassessed by an amount sufficient to warrant an appeal in accordance with our District Policy 605 are actually brought to the board for consideration to appeal. The cost of the evaluation is $4,750, and again, that's just to determine which properties meet the criteria of our policy. Any properties that meet the criteria and that would be approved to move forward with appeal would require a formal appraisal be done, and there would be additional fees per the chart on page 3. So the timeline for this process only occurs once per year, so the board really only has the ability to appeal property assessments once per year. So I do feel it's important to complete this as a matter of our due diligence every year, and property owners have the same opportunity each year to appeal their property assessment if they feel that it's overassessed. So our recommendation is to continue to move forward with ValBridge Property Advisors to do this annual analysis for the board.
Comments or questions? Okay, so we'll move that one ahead. All right, thank you. The MCIU budget.
Yeah, so each year, member districts of the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit are required to take action on a specific portion of the MCIU budget. It's called their membership services budget. It's made up of 3 specific areas: Office of Community and Government Relations, Office of Organizational and Professional Learning, and Office of Technology Services. I have included, the MCIU provides their full budget packet, so that's included for anyone that wants to learn more about what each of those areas cover. When you look at the details, the total of this budget is a little over $2 million, which is about a 10% increase, but it's a much smaller increase to the share that districts pay into that budget and are required to pay. So $1.56 million is the district share portion of that budget. So the membership contribution to fund these services has a $43,400 increase from last year's budget for the MCIU. Our specific share is $65,294, which is an increase of a little over $1,000 from the current year. And it is important to note that this fee is completely separate from the special education services that we contract for the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit that they provide for us. And that billing is also handled separately and is based on a fee-for-service model. So it has nothing to do with the special education services that they're providing for us. So I'm happy to answer any questions, do my best. If there's any detailed or specific questions, I will be happy to bounce them back off of the MCIU and bring them back.
Comments or questions on this item? Titia.
I think this is more a question for the administration, but are we happy with what we're getting from them? Because that ultimately is...
We're content with what we're getting.
As a reminder, one of us, Dr. Davis, does have a seat on their board as well, so we do have a conduit to address any of those sorts of concerns that we did have.
The best services that we're getting from the IU, aside from the special education services, are the community engagement and government relation department. We don't typically take advantage of the curriculum services that they offer beyond some resources, but the government relations services are the best. And it also, that share also goes to fund our job-alike meetings. So superintendents, CFOs, Mr. Hoffman is part of the assistant superintendent group. Dr. Blankman is part of the special ed and student services group, and Ms. Pouste is part of the curriculum job-alike group.
All right, any other comments or questions on this, Jenna?
Any comments specifically on the technology services? And I ask because it obviously represents the largest portion of our share, and I imagine everyone's share, so by a pretty significant amount.
Mr. Patel is here. I believe a large portion of that is our internet connectivity, correct? Yes. So instead of, because districts don't buy right from 400 Broad, it's purchased through the intermediate unit.
Anyone else? Okay, so we'll move this item ahead. Okay, thank you. Transition to a new consultant for energy pricing.
Yeah, so we, school districts typically utilize consultants for the procurement of energy. Specifically for us, we utilize Amorex Energy for consulting services related to the procurement of natural gas and electricity. We've used Amorex since about 2017. We've been through 2 renewals during my time here. We renewed natural gas, which currently is scheduled to end in December of 2023. And then in June, you remember, we were in the middle of the crazy electric market that was going on as we were working on renewal of our electric contract. And we just locked in electric rates for 5 years as well. So Amorex has certainly done a fine job for us. We've appreciated working with Amorex. But what I'm recommending tonight, along with Bob Lester, is a transition away from Amorex to Provident Energy. And the reason for that is Provident is a local consultant. Amorex operates out of Texas. So Provident is local. They know the national market. They know the Pennsylvania market as well. They service a number of school districts in this area, both local and across the state. So they are very adept at doing this work. They know the school district market. They know our needs. And both Bob and I have worked with Provident in the past, and they are excellent at what they do. We also see Provident on a regular basis. They present at local meetings. They present at local conferences. We see them. Provident actually provided a complimentary look at the offer that Amorex provided to us when we were looking at it, just because of how volatile the markets were. I was concerned if we were getting the best rates or not, and Provident did look at that, and they did confirm. So I think they're both solid companies, but we really feel it would be in our best interest to transition to Provident to start providing us. We feel like now's an important time to make that decision because we have a natural gas renewal that's coming up in December. While that's still 9 months away, it's important for us to begin to monitor the markets now and make sure we lock in at an advantageous time. So we feel now's the right time to look at making that transition. What we have in here is an approval. Basically would look like we would sign a letter of exclusivity with Provident, and that would give them the ability to access our accounts with natural gas and electric and begin to kind of build a strategy for us to renew not only natural gas, but to start to keep an eye on the electric market for us and line us up with recommendations they're making for other school districts. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but again, the recommendation is to transition to Provident as our energy consultant.
Comments or questions? Art?
Amorex contract doesn't expire until June of 2027. Can we get out of that contract then?
So that's not a contract with Amorex per se. That's our electric rate lock. We're not getting out of the contract. We're just using Provident now as our consultant going forward for any new agreements that we put in place. So no, we cannot cancel that 5-year agreement that we have on electric, but that agreement isn't with Amorex per se. That's our electric agreement.
Okay. I'd be curious what we're paying, so when you get a chance, if you can forward us that.
So the payment, it's not, we don't pay Amorex for the work that they do.
I understand that. I mean, at Eastern, we just went into another agreement and we locked in a rate for a certain number of years. I'm just curious what we were able to lock in and for how long. I guess it was through 2027.
You mean the specific electric agreement that we approved, that the board approved?
Yeah.
You want to see a copy of that contract?
Yeah, yeah. Does it fluctuate every year? Is it locked in for the 5 years?
No, yep, the board approved a 5-year agreement for electric.
And it's locked for 5 years?
Locked in for 5 years, correct.
Yeah, it was only a few months ago, I feel like.
Yeah.
It was in May, I believe.
I think it was
go back and look at
7
that.
point something.
I think it was closer to 11.
11? Oh. Okay.
Bob, do you remember?
Okay.
Yeah.
Can look
I
it up.
believe it was,
Yeah, I need to look at it.
One of us can dig back through previous
thank you.
meetings and take a look. Yeah. All right, any other comments or questions on this item? So we'll move that, oh, I'm sorry, Titia.
The Provident group, are they also versed in renewables? It's not just, I mean, this is all things electric, I assume, and not just conventional electric, could be any source.
Correct. They're a consultant in the market. They would meet our needs. They would evaluate the market. They would go out to bid based on how we instruct them to. So no, yes, they would be in all parts of the market wherever we instruct them that we want to evaluate the market at, whether it's your typical market or renewable sources.
Andy, I think I know the answer to this, but since it's exclusive, we still have to notify Amarak or terminate with them in some form once we do it, right?
We would absolutely reach out to Amerex and talk to them and let them know that we're making a transition. Absolutely. Vince has done good work for us over there, so I would absolutely speak with him for sure.
I just looked up the information from May. Oh, do you have it? Okay, Bob, go ahead. I think I won the race, but I'll let Bob talk about it.
Looking at the contract, looks like we're locked in for 7.743 cents per kilowatt.
All right. All right, any other comments on this agreement? All right, so we'll move that forward? Yeah. All right, thank you. We have two settlement stipulations.
Yep, the last two items are settlement stipulations. There's one commercial settlement with 1750 Susquehanna Road. That was, again, part of our agreement with Valbridge. It was a district-initiated appeal. That resulted in, it'll be a tax gain this year of $50,050. And then moving forward, it would be a tax gain of $31,253 in 2023 going forward. The other is a residential property, 435 Dreshertown Road. That was a owner appeal, and that would be the settlement stipulation will result in a tax loss of $4,379. Not for this year. That would be 2023 and moving forward.
Comments or questions on either or both of those? All right, so we'll move those ahead? Yes, okay, thank you. And we are through our reports and recommendations for this month. We are up to public participation. So if anyone would like to address the committee, please come on up to the mic. The guidelines for that process are in the agenda. You will have 4 minutes. Ms. Evans will time us. And please state your name and where you reside in the district.
I'm afraid to touch this. Annie Brister, Fort Washington. Okay, so I'm not trying to prolong the meetings, but this is tonight and last month, pages 47 to 52, which are the financial reports, were not discussed or presented. Now, I get it that we can read it on our own, and I do get that it's repetitive, but I've mentioned this before, that so much time is being spent on facilities, and I can see why there would be a lot of time spent on the facilities. But then what's happening is the finance piece of the meeting, like it's not really okay to never present those pages, is my opinion. Maybe you don't have to present them every month, but maybe you could give us like some annotation, like when will you be presenting them? So I have a couple questions about that, but you know, I'll just go with what I can. I mean, obviously the biggest chunk of any district's budget is the salaries and the benefits. I'd really love to see, since transparency is supposed to be one of the goals, and I know you are going to have a upcoming finance town hall, maybe you want to do it there, I don't know. But what about taking those big chunks of the budgets, the salary and the benefits, and giving a little further information on those? You know, where do we stand compared to other districts would be one thing that you could really present. You could present things like where's our per pupil spending compared to others. You could be talking about the millage compared to others. So by glossing over that, like this month and last month, and not discussing it at all, I just think that's a mistake. I mean, I know you're not going to return to the days that I kind of wish you would occasionally, which is that we would take, the board was given every single section of the budget, okay? The debt, the salary, the benefits, every single one of those numbers. You did maybe 3 on one budget night, and you did 5 others on another budget night. This is like gone now. It's not being done here. It wasn't really done with Dr. Wheeler either. So, but I don't know that that's a good thing. And Art, I know we're not supposed to like name any names when we're up here. You might want to weigh in on it. It's up to you. But you and I have the most history. I think you probably remember what I'm talking about, that the budget meetings were divided up over 5, 6 nights for sections of each budget category. So I don't know, it bothers me a little bit that it's in there, but it's not being discussed. One question I have, which is just, does have to do with, do you expect any significant savings from retirements? Or is it too early to know that? Usually there are significant savings. Another related question to that, I think I've asked this before, but I really don't remember what the answer was. How often would it be appropriate to do an early retirement incentive? I know you did one a couple years ago, I think. I also know you don't want to do one every single year because it wouldn't really pay off. But how often would it be kind of appropriate for a school district to do that? I was a little disappointed. There was a lot of discussion tonight, which is great, but there was a little disappointed that you're holding all your discussion about which site you're leaning towards till next month. And so they're going to have your discussion next month, but then you also said, and I think I'm correct, Mark, that you said you're going to vote on it next month. It'd be nice to have had some of that discussion tonight so the public could see which site are you leaning towards and why. I think both sites have some real drawbacks compared to what it was supposed to be, which was supposed to be at the high school property. All right, I'll stop since my time's up.
Anyone else?
Sorry, I missed some of the meeting, I apologize. Ginny Vitella, Ambler. I want to say both sites are terrible for the bus depot, both for very different reasons. Both are right near school, both take up already non-impervious surface, right, to get an EV, again, getting an EV plug-in, but we're getting rid of open space and kids' fields while adding traffic, noise, congestion, pollutions to schools and to play fields, let alone the traffic impact on families that live in that area and walkers. Fort Washington's horrible. Fort Washington Avenue's horrible, right? You first go through Maple Glen, it's terrible at get out hour. You go through the high school, it's terrible, and you go through Fort Washington. And now we're going to add all the buses to go down Fort Washington Avenue. And we also deal with 309 traffic, and we also have not seen the impact of traffic of the proposed 900 apartment buildings, it's 480 units in apartments, 2 buildings are proposed and agreed upon. One is in the proposal process already on the township in the industrial park. Imagine the traffic that's going to come from there, let alone students, whatever. Both locations are horrible. Last night I sat through a 5-hour meeting at the township. They are proposing a $52 million project across the street, which includes a 3 to 5 bay garage, a gas station, and a township building and police. I just don't understand why we cannot work together. By the way, they blame you. They say you won't talk, and I say, please, I beg of you. I don't know if it's a clash of personalities. I don't know if it's an ego thing. I just feel like we can save Upper Dublin Township residents, which are the same exact people that are Upper Dublin School District residents, money if we work together. They've hired Dewey for that. They've hired their architect already for that. I asked them to please come up with a drawing to fit 52 buses in that spot and then add the garage, but they poo-poo me because who am I? I'm just a community member. Ideally, all these buses should be housed in the industrial park. Our lot that we rent is horrible, agreed, but it is $400,000, and quite frankly, at a $10 million price tag, that takes 20-some years to pay back, right? And we don't even use that whole building. So there's got to be a lot that can fit 52 buses. That's not near a school. It's not near someone's home. It's not on a busy road already that's well-traveled and well-walked by children. And it's already impervious. And you can work together, because then we could just build one unit versus two different. The $52 million project, they didn't break that out for the facilities piece of that versus the township building and police station. So I don't know that breakdown, but maybe we could please, I beg of you, this is a perfect opportunity to take advantage of us sharing the same exact borders. Not too many school districts have that advantage. Most split across very different municipalities, because then there is more of a battle about money. This is literally, we go back and forth with money between the township. They got $2 million they just released to us last night, right? That they've been holding in escrow that we had to borrow and paid interest on. That's a whole other story. So I just feel like both these locations were fitting a square peg into a round hole, just like Sandy Run Middle School. And I will tell you, as a taxpayer, I am willing, and I said this about Sandy Run, the $70 million project bothered me the most because A, we didn't really afford it, but B, it was on a really bad lot that does have an unplayable softball field. It has an unusable basketball court because of safety purposes, and it's in a floodplain. So anyway, please don't fit a square peg in a round hole for a $10 million plus project that's detrimental to students, walkers, homeowners, and traffic. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sunday Herzog. Let's see. On page 42, it talks about, and I live in Drescher, talks about public transportation or pupil transportation. And I've never spoken at a meeting before, but I'm just, I have two students. One is assigned a 2-hour before school starts pickup, the other one an hour and a half before school starts. So you are all brilliant people and you're all problem solvers, and I'm just asking for help with that problem. And I guess in 2021, I also asked for help with problem for the location of my children's bus stop. And they were pushed out into a busy street with no shoulder, no sidewalk. The traffic is 45 miles an hour. So the other kids on my street get picked up on the street, but that's where I got pushed out to. So again, I'm also asking for help with that. So that's it. Thank you.
I'm Lance Shapiro, live in Maple Glen. My concern is the bus depot. I live next to Maple Glen. I have 2 children that go to Maple Glen. I understand the current location is not a great situation, but basically telling the community that we only have 2 options next to a school, they're both bad options. And the idea that we're going to spend $10 million on a bad option just doesn't seem like a great idea. There's a ton of walkers at Maple Glen. If anybody goes to Maple Glen in the morning or during pickup, you can see how busy the street is. There's already a ton of traffic that cuts from Welsh Road all the way down to Pennsylvania Avenue into Fort Washington, that cuts from Limekiln Pike all the way down Fort Washington Avenue, down to Pennsylvania Avenue, and then adding the buses when you have adolescent-age children, some of whom walk by themselves to and from school. It just seems like an accident waiting to happen. And I know there's people that have concerns about Fort Washington Elementary, and I know that's not a great situation either. But like, I just can't understand how we're being asked to decide between 2 very poor options, not to mention the environmental and health impact on putting a bus depot across the street from a school where you're going to have children outside at recess, during gym. You use, I know the field that's on Maple Glen is used for field hockey, for soccer, and you're going to have a bus depot running back and forth with I don't know how many buses, not to mention the removal of the open space that is there. Selfishly, I don't want it because I live literally on that street. But never mind that, the idea that you're going to have all these buses, all the traffic. When I walked home yesterday with my kids from school, there was almost an accident on the street in front of Maple Glen Elementary. So all I'm asking this board to do is, instead of giving the community two bad choices, can we find a better solution? I don't necessarily know what that is. And again, I know the current location where we're parking and everything, the buses isn't great. But putting it next to an elementary school, I mean, you can do a quick Google and see whether it's the NIH, the Medicine Journal, about bus fumes and the impact on adolescents' respiratory systems. I have a child with asthma. It would be a very bad situation. So I'm just asking that instead of, what I'm hearing is we're going to make a recommendation next meeting, and I agree, I understand there's interest in the boilers and everything, but there's very little to no questions from this group here about a plan that we're going to make a judgment on next week that has a much bigger impact on the community. And again, at the end of the day, it should be about the children. And to me, there's just an accident waiting to happen when you have 6 to 11-year-olds walking to and from school, and you're going to put buses in addition to all the traffic that's already there. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Howard Tyson, also from Maple Glen. Mostly wanted to +1 those concerns. I live right on the other side of the woods behind those soccer fields. You know, the noise already carries from the school, which we love. We hear the kids playing outside every day throughout the entire neighborhood. But the noise, the fumes, right up against the school, and as the gentleman said, there, you know, at drop-off time, at pickup time in the mornings, there is traffic often backed up all the way up to the stop sign. So adding, what do we say, 52 buses coming in and out of there kind of all at once, at least some of that would be during rush hour. It just seems like logistically that's just going to create a huge problem in terms of traffic patterns, in terms of kids crossing the street, you know, not to mention clearing out this green space and making that, you know, obviously, again, selfishly less attractive, but the logistical concerns. All the neighbors on my street found out about this relatively recently. Many of them wanted to be here this week. We'll try to next month. A lot of concern about that approach. Again, also know the 309 option isn't perfect either. Understand we need to do something here, but definitely concerned about the Maple.
Any other comments?
Hi, I'm Erin Stein. I'm from Fort Washington. My concern, I have a concern and questions tonight that I hope you can answer. My concern is facilities related, but not so much the transportation center, but is instead of school safety. One, the amount of school shootings that have been unfortunately a part of our new normal, as I hate to say. And also an incident that occurred on January 25th at the high school where 3 outsiders were let into the building. And obviously that is concerning for a multitude of reasons. And I'm also concerned with the length of time that it took to get that situation under control. To me as a parent, that was a clear indication that our kids are not safe. And while we're talking about spending millions of dollars on all of this stuff, which is great, my question is, what are we, or are we spending anything on school safety? A simple Google search that I did, I am no professional by any means, but that provides endless amounts of agencies, technologies, systems that are available And my question is, what are we investing in as far as our student safety? Because none of this other stuff matters if our kids aren't safe. The number one thing that came up in the search was the number one thing that keeps schools safe was a secure perimeter. From what I can see, not one of our 6 schools has any sort of secure perimeter that isn't, that anybody can drive into any of our schools at any time during the day, from what I can tell. And I briefly searched through months of the past finance agendas, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I couldn't find any agenda item that addressed any spending on school safety. And I gotta believe, in the years that I've been a parent here, which started in 2005, that there have been progress made in the securities and the technologies that we could have to be keeping these kids safe. So my question is, could you please tell me if you as a board and facilities and finance and committees all think that we are doing all that we can to ensure the safety of our kids? And could we be, should we be, and are we planning and investing as we're talking about spending these tens of millions of dollars? I can't think of anything more important that we could be spending our money on. So I guess while we're, my other question is, while we're assessing all of these buildings and roofs and bus depots, and are we assessing the safety of the buildings that we do have? Thank you.
My name is Michael Carney, 521 Madison Avenue, Fort Washington. I'd like to talk about the building for the bus we're talking about. It's a very specific facility designed to handle the maintenance of an internal combustion engine vehicle. As I understand it, the long-term plan for the school district from the September 22 report was that we would eventually add on electric vehicles over a 10-year period. So we're building this maintenance facility that wouldn't be ready for 2 years while we're getting ready to phase out those internal combustion engine vehicles. And those vehicles have a very different space requirement and maintenance requirement versus electric vehicles. I didn't see any sort of mention of that. So in conceivably 10 years, we're done with the design purpose of that building. We don't need it for internal combustion engine maintenance. We now have a fleet of electric vehicles that need a fraction of the time, human time, and a fraction of the space, physical space, and they will run for the next however many years we want. So we have a mismatch between building for an internal combustion engine maintenance routine, which I believe is correct, and every bay is needed and the time is allocated carefully, but we're in the process of getting rid of that for good reason. So there's a big design mismatch there. The building lasts for 50 years. It's serving its purpose for 20% of that time. What's it doing for the other 80% of its time? For those of you not familiar with electric vehicles, they have nowhere need the maintenance of it. And I don't believe I'm misstating it to say that an electric vehicle, a bus or a car, has about 10% of the maintenance needs of a combustion engine. So now we have a problem. We've built a building, but we don't really have any need for it. So I want to bring that up as number one. There's also this very centralized mindset with this maintenance facility. You want to bring all the buses back because you can only do work in this place with these bays that are going to lift the vehicles up. If you get rid of the maintenance requirement, which electric vehicles would do, which we're planning on doing, then there's really no need to have a centralized facility to come back to. They don't need to come back to get electricity that's special at whether it's Maple Glen or Fort Washington. Matter of fact, they could get electricity at any school facility we have. Electricity is like water. It tastes the same wherever you are. You could have pods of electric vehicles, and the infrastructure at each one of the schools is sufficient to charge X number of vehicles. So if we're looking to save money, and I think we are, I think we have to look at why we're building a maintenance facility for a type of use that we're getting rid of. And now let's start really thinking about the savings with an electric vehicle program. The real savings. First of all, you don't need to build this maintenance facility. You don't need to build the size of it, that's for sure. So, that is the 2 points I'd like to make. Electric vehicles have a fraction of the maintenance required, and the facility we are building will have less than 20% of its serviceable life with the design defect. And then what else is it doing? And I didn't really hear that today, and I haven't heard it in this. And no time remaining. Thank you.
Hey, good evening. Mike Elner, Maple Glen. So just wanted to talk a little bit on transportation issues. So echo a lot of the comments already heard. I agree, it seemed odd that, and maybe you have dialogue outside the meeting, and that's fine, but there seemed to be like a ton of time on boilers and almost no dialogue on transportation. Something I'm not an expert on, but was just curious. It feels like we have residential districts within and zoning accordingly, and we have commercial. And I get you can do variances, but I guess just puzzled, why wouldn't we aim to build commercial type things, right? Even though it might be affiliated with the school, why wouldn't we want to put commercial things like a bus depot or like no different than to me like an auto service center? Why wouldn't we want to build that in a commercial zone that we already have within the district, in the township versus in a residential district? So like, to me, it's not Maple Glen versus Fort Washington versus Jarrettstown. It's, we have residential districts and we should keep them residential. And that's what I think a lot of people like about living in Upper Dublin, right? You have this nice residential feel and you don't want it to feel like, hey, I'm in a commercial district while I'm walking my kid to school or picking them up or just trying to drive down Fort Washington Ave. And then my question is, why do we need to make a decision, right? Like, I heard, hey, we can get bond funding and it offsets the cost of what we pay today, but just because we can fund it, I don't know. My mind doesn't necessarily mean it's the right answer and we need to do that now. I would just ask, can we think more about what are alternatives? And I appreciate this is land the school district owns and it's probably the cheapest option, but I don't know if that means it's the best option long-term for the community. So just wanted to share those thoughts and ask if you could think on that. Thanks.
Okay, seeing no one else coming to the mic. We did have 3 comments submitted through the online form, and I will read those now. First one is from Lance Shapiro from Fort Washington. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Did you say what you, yes, okay. I will skip that one. You never know if it's the same name, you know, so I appreciate your letting me know. Okay, next one is from, Mandy Zachariah. I'm writing in regards to the bus depot. The original plan was to take away the Field of Dreams and put the bus depot near Fort Washington Elementary. If it was decided that this plan was a bad idea, then why would it be a good idea to take away Edwards Field and put it near Maple Glen Elementary? There must be a location in the office park to house buses that do not have to take away playing fields from our children. The other option is to work together with the township and their plan to build a new facility and fueling station. Since the current bus depot has been using one bay for the past 12 years, having two bays at the new township facility would be sufficient. Also, would there most likely be some office space? There would most likely be some office space in the new building that could be used for the transportation department, since the space they are using currently is not large. This is all perfect timing to build these two spaces together. The school district and township, which both include the same community members, need to put aside their differences and do what is best for our children and taxpayers. And the final comment is from Jennifer Boyd, who wrote, "I just wanted to express my opposition to the building of a bus depot on Edwards Fields. We should not be taking away any of the much-needed fields in this township. In addition, that's a congested area with young children walking and biking to school, and the added traffic will be a dangerous nightmare. Maple Glen uses that parking lot for every school concert, class party, teacher conferences, and many other school events/activities. The school district needs to try to work with the township to share facilities. It's ridiculous to expect the same taxpayers to fund two new fueling stations right down the road from one another." And with that, I will close public participation, and we'll see if anyone from the administration or board wants to make any comments. Steve.
Sure. So thank you, Mr. Sirota. I will address some of the other topics first, and then we can go into the transportation facility. So the budget, how we work on developing the budget is that each department just finished doing their first run of their needs-based budget. Mr. Leckman has been working with them. Mr. Hoffman's been working with our instructional administrators along with Mr. Leckman, and we will soon see that the first iteration. And then there'll be an iterative process where we will go through and we'll question expenditures and question needs in the budget. The biggest part of our budget is always going to be salaries and benefits. And if there are any new staff that we need to add, those will come as requests to the board because those are significant dollars. In terms of retirement savings, so as of today, we have 5 individuals who have announced their retirement. All 5 of those do need to be replaced because they're in high demand areas or they'll be needed for enrollment. So the savings will not be as large, obviously, as if we didn't have to replace those positions. So, those positions will exist in the budget, and we are expecting, due to enrollment, 2 additional elementary classroom positions next year to keep our class sizes within acceptable ranges. So any savings from those retirements that we have will be eaten up by the addition of those positions, but actual numbers we'll talk about later this spring. Retirement incentives are only really productive if we're not going to replace positions. And there's been some change in legislation about offering health care benefits post-retirement. In the past, when districts would do retirement incentives, a big part of that retirement incentive would be health care benefits or even financial contributions towards those. There have been some changes. We're not looking to do any type of retirement incentive because just about any position that would be vacated by a retirement would need to be replaced. Working together with the township. I can only speak to the 5 years that I've been here, but there is a continued desire from this side of the street to work with the township. It's disappointing to hear that they blame us. I'm only speaking for myself, and this is not a comment against the township. I learned about the township project over the weekend. I don't think any of us had any knowledge of that project being planned until it made its way onto social media. I think the community member that mentioned about the fields at Sandy Run, as soon as we have games on there, I'm going to invite her and we'll cheer on teams from those appropriately sized fields. The question about the bus stop that was asked, I will have Mr. Robbins follow up with that community member tomorrow, as I'm getting 2 different answers when I'm asked about amounts of time that kids are on our vehicles. But I will say, last year we had this stop evaluated by PennDOT, and it was not deemed to be a hazardous route. The safety incident that we had at Upper Dublin High School in January, the breakdown in protocol was that one of our students allowed 2 students to enter the building. They didn't come through an unlocked door. They didn't come in. They didn't breach. They didn't breach entry of the building on their own. They actually had someone in the building that they texted to say, "Please let us in." So we had a student that we had to deal with that matter, letting other students in. The length of time that it took for the event to be brought to a close, the district, when we're in an emergency situation, we set up a command center, we're in charge until the police come on site. Once the police come on site, they take incident command. So we were taking our direction from the Upper Dublin Police. So they wanted to make sure that they were thorough in their investigation. I think we all agree, and I think even looking back, the police now even agree that it was a little bit longer than it needed to be for us to resume normal operations. But in terms of safety, we have upgraded our cameras. We have upgraded our Raptor systems. We have a list that the board has seen of safety things that have been recommended by the Upper Dublin Police Department and that we have taken action on. Additionally, the Upper Dublin Police and Montgomery County Emergency Services do evaluations of our buildings all the time. They're here for our drills. We're going to be doing some tabletop exercises with the police at their request. And so the next thing we're talking about is how are we creating situations that it becomes more and more difficult if someone in a vehicle would want to, for lack of a better expression, crash into one of our buildings. And so we know that we have some gates at some of our buildings. To create a true secure perimeter where something would be locked off, we can't do that because of emergency vehicles having to get in and out. But we do have to look, like most districts have to look, at ballards or other types of structures that would be put at vulnerable areas of our buildings. Regarding the transportation facility, so keep in mind that when we build, wherever we build the facility, and whenever we start making that conversion to electric vehicles, that conversion is not going to happen in 1 year. That conversion is going to happen over a span of time. Right now, the cost of those vehicles are prohibitive. I believe it's over $300,000, Mr. Leckman, as compared to about $150,000 or less for a traditional bus. So just like we've been onboarding new buses over time, when we make the switch to EV, when the time is right and when the cost isn't prohibitive, it would take us a while to turn over our entire fleet. Some big open question marks are, can you have a completely electric fleet? We live in the Northeast. We know, at least right now, the electric buses that districts are using across the country, extremely affected by swings in temperature. We also have long distance runs that we need to do, field trips and whatnot. So I don't think we'll ever have a completely electric fleet, but I just wanted to make sure that that was out there. I also hear the concern about the congestion in traffic wherever we put the fleet. So keeping in mind that per state law, vehicles can only idle for 5 minutes. They can't, is it 5 minutes? 5, yeah. I wanted to make sure it wasn't 15. They can only idle for 5 minutes. So the only time that all vehicles, and I'm not trying to minimize anybody's point, but the only time all vehicles would be leaving the facility would be in the morning to start the runs. As they return after the morning run and as they return at the end of the day, they would be staggered. Again, we mentioned we learned of the township project this past weekend, so there wasn't, at least from my perspective, an opportunity to work with the township. The last thing I'll say about the transportation facility before anyone else wants to talk about it. This has been a conversation for some time. I think the reason that there's urgency now, we are currently renting. The owner of that facility, we believe, wants to move on, and so the terms of, leasing with them are not favorable for the district. And so they are making some improvements there. We don't know when that building is going to be sold, and ultimately, we need a solution for taking care of our fleet, for parking our fleet, and making sure that we can transport kids to and from school.
All right, a few things I'd like to add to that. Regarding retirements, there is a clause in our contract. We have an incentive in the contract for staff to notify us by March 1st. If they plan to retire at the end of the year. They don't have to notify us by then, but there's an incentive for them to tell us early so that we can get out into the hiring market early. So we don't expect to know the answer yet anyway. I mean, it's early for us to know how many retirements we would have. But we will know more about that soon. A lot of the questions around presentation of financials are things that, in my recollection, happen during the budget development process, not at every finance committee meeting when talking about the monthly financials. Certainly that process has evolved over time as we've had turnover in our CFO role. And just as time passes and we have turnover in the board as well. Yeah, I mean, it's possible that some of that could be covered at the town hall, or more of it could be covered during our budget development process, which, gets into heavy gear as we move into the spring. On school safety stuff, in my time on the board, we've also installed airlock entrances at each of the buildings. The Raptor system you mentioned, there's continuous and ongoing training around these processes and plan development and all those kinds of things, which are not necessarily visible from the outside. You wouldn't necessarily find, a discussion at a board meeting around, well, the airlock entrances obviously got discussed because that was a building development thing, but capital development. But a lot of those things don't get discussed, and in fact, safety is one of the things that is allowed to be discussed and is discussed in executive session for boards, not in public meetings. Regarding the EV, the design of the transportation facility, the design that's there on paper is not done. I mean, an architect has not done that. That's not done by an architect. That was just sort of a rough plan that sort of covers the idea of the building. That still needs to be designed, the exact details of what goes into it, how big it is, how big each of those spaces are, whether all those exact spaces need to be part of it. All that stuff still needs to happen once we come up with a facility. It's worth mentioning that the building itself is a relatively small percentage of the cost of the entire project. Assuming, even if we do have the centralized mindset, as somebody mentioned, that we build a central facility to store our vehicles and have the drivers park their personal vehicles and then clock in and clock out and all those kinds of activities, charging, refueling, all those things. The building itself is not, I don't have a percentage, but it's not a large percentage of the total cost of the project. But still, it does need to be developed. I agree completely. I mentioned at a meeting recently, I wonder whether we'll continue to need as many bays if we have EV, because they do need a lot less maintenance. They still need maintenance. I mean, tires get changed, rear ends. They do have to lift the vehicles up, but there is a lot less, no question about it, maintenance required for an EV. Anyone else have comments on public participation? Meet you.
I think it's probably important for everybody to hear again that this is not the first time we're discussing locations for the bus garage. We've looked at many other places, and I think the cost of purchasing land in a different location is a consideration in this whole project. I think one of the other suggestions that was made to maybe not have something centralized, while in some ways that may be attractive, I think we also have to be very concerned about the safety of our buses as they are parked. That maybe not be something that is immediately coming to mind, but we have to have places where the buses can be, whether that's centralized or decentralized, but that is a consideration as well.
Andy.
I don't have a particular response to any of the issues that were raised, but I do think that it's really important as we sit here as a board to recognize that 8 people came forward this evening to raise different concerns to us about these projects. And then we had 2 people who wrote in an email. And I think that just from my own perspective, I think that's terrific that the community came out this evening. And I just want you to know that we thank you for coming out and for voicing your thoughts and your concerns to give us some additional considerations that we need to ponder as we look at this issue. So thank you.
Alima.
I just want to address the comment about school safety. I've lived in the district for 6 years, and never once have I sent my kids to school thinking about if they're safe. There's always been this level of reassurance that they're safe. My heart goes out to the families who are suffering the grief of loss from massive school shootings, but also the most recent one in Michigan State. The thought of sending your kid off to college and them being exposed to that. I want to address our school safety and understand that I have 2 kids in the district as well at the high school. And I texted them the minute I heard the announcement. And what was reassuring is that even though they were angry, frustrated, scared, they felt safe. So I just want to say that looking in, there was a opportunity, and I think that opportunity has been addressed by the superintendent as well as the principal. But I would never, even today, I still feel that our kids are safe in this school. And post that event, I'd never had a secondary thought of their safety. So I just want to put that out there.
Jeff.
I just wanted to respond a little bit to the couple of comments that there wasn't dialogue about the transportation facility tonight, and at least give you my perspective or an insight into my thought process to try to address that. And I don't want to speak for the entire board, but ICS provided us with a lot of information tonight. And in past meetings, we've gotten information about the 309 site and about EV and various other things, some of which Dr. Yanni and Mr. Leckman touched on. And to me, I need to take all that in. And the information we got from ICS tonight was very valuable, and that the company's done yeoman's work in order to give us even more information to consider. And I also want to echo what Mr. Kessler said, to thank everyone that came and raised questions and provided us with input, because it's valuable. And I can tell you that I am taking it all in. I've got a pad of notes here, and it's not an easy decision. None of us up here treat any of these kinds of decisions as an easy decision. And the more information we have, the better. And I think in March, if we do get to a point in March of making a recommendation at the committee level or the board, there'll probably be more dialogue, because we're going to have to throw some of these issues onto the floor and discuss them more actively. But I don't want anyone to think that just because a couple of us or all of us didn't ask pointed questions about the facility, that it's not weighing on our minds, and it's not going to be taken very, very seriously for our community and in consideration both from our technical advisors, our administration, and our community members.
All right, on the transportation facility, just a little bit of a reminder of, yeah, thank you, Jeff. So, right, next month, we will have, as much detail as we talked about boilers tonight, we'll talk about transportation next month. And so part of the goal here, we got a feasibility study, which is part of a long process that really began, well, it began a long time ago, but I would say it began in earnest in 2018 is when we really started talking about this. So this isn't just popping up. We have been talking about transportation facility locations for a long time. We are always on the lookout for other properties that may work. Back in 2018, we did discuss at a fairly high level, working with the township on it, but it is true that we have not had further conversations recently with them, and they did not, to my knowledge, ask any of us as they developed the plans that they presented last month to their commissioners. I would love to work with them. I do think that's an opportunity, but unless we're going to do it on property that one or both of us, owns, I don't think, we're always on the lookout for other properties. I don't think there is one. We haven't spotted one. If we spotted one, we would have moved on it. I know people don't love either of these options, but I do think and the goal of saying so this month is so that next month, because these are meetings for the committee to engage with each other, to hear from our experts and our administration and have meaningful conversations in front of the public. And so we're saying this month that we're going to do that next month to maximize the visibility of that. That's why a lot of the conversation hasn't happened this month, because we want to do it with advance notice. So I think that's it. Any other comments, questions, anything on public participation or on the rest of the meeting? Jenna.
Yeah, I just want to get back to the school safety comment, because it's again, we have, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 kids among us in the district. So it's something that is personally important to all of us on top of our fiduciary duty to the district. So I just want to be very clear. We have had discussions, again, in executive session. We don't talk about it here about safety. I want to be crystal clear about that. Has happened and is going to continue to happen. Again, it's, as Mark mentioned, one of those topics that we don't discuss openly here for, obvious reasons. But again, I want to be very clear. It has happened and is going to continue to happen.
All right. With that, let me announce that our next Finance Committee meeting will be Tuesday, March 14th at 6 p.m. Again, that's a Tuesday. Normally, they're Wednesday. The March meeting will be on Tuesday, March 14th at 6 p.m. right here in the Upper Dublin High School Cardinal Room. And we are adjourned. Thank you.